Great senator, what a great friend, and the regret is there aren't more Johnny Isaksons around. We'll miss him badly. One of the words I use to describe him is not a word that's used that often around here describing senators, kind. He was one of the kindest people we met, and we all regaled one another with stories about him. He worked in a bipartisan way, something we all long for. And one way to work in a bipartisan way is to get the NDAA bill done in a bipartisan way. And one of the things we Democrats would like to see added to that bill is election security. When you're talking about American security, there's probably nothing more important other than life and limb than securing our elections and making sure they're fair, making sure that a foreign power doesn't intervene. And the window to address election security is getting smaller and smaller. Given that Vladimir Putin's disinformation campaign to deflect blame for interfering in the 2016 election has infiltrated not only the Trump White House but the Senate Republican Conference, the need for meaningful reform to secure our elections couldn't be greater. Instead of Putin wanted to deflect blame to Ukraine, and our Republican friends are falling right into that trap. Willingly, I think. Earlier this year, if anyone thinks Russia's not up to its same old tricks, here's what Director Wray said. The Russians are absolutely intent on trying to interfere with our elections. Director Wray and other national security leaders have reinforced that conclusion over the past 3 years. Russia interfered and wants to keep interfering. And the Founding Fathers felt foreign interference in our elections was one of the greatest problems the young Republic could have faced. It's just as big, if not more of a problem today, more than it's been in centuries. This is a matter of national security, and so an obvious place for it is in the Defense Authorization Bill. The place to increase funding for election security is in another place to do it is in the appropriations process, and we hope we can get a bipartisan appropriations bill. But I just saw what was reported about President Trump. He seems to feel on the appropriations bills, my way or the highway. Well, that would show that he hasn't learned his lesson. Because if President Trump doesn't sit down with us and negotiate a bill, we'll have a second Trump shutdown. And that wasn't good for Trump. That wasn't good for the Republicans. We hope he has learned his lesson, because we want to sit down and work these things out. It's laughable that Republicans can blame Democrats when they know darn well that on the appropriations process, it's President Trump who's holding everything up and making the chances of a shutdown, a Trump shutdown, a little more real than anybody would like. Hope it doesn't happen. I still don't think it will happen. I hope cooler heads will prevail. But that's where Trump seems to be headed these days, and I'm worried about it. Senator Durbin.
We had a memorable Senate moment gathering on a bipartisan basis to honor Johnny Isaacson. Lamar Alexander said that it's hard to get to the Senate, it's hard to stay in the Senate, and while you're here, you might as well do something. And he used that as his introduction to Johnny Isaacson's career. He talked a lot about the man, and you can certainly spend a lot of time with good praise for this man. A gentle man, a kind man, a man who was always looking to solve problems and pass legislation. But then several senators got up and went through his legislation that he achieved. Lamar Alexander went through a long list of bills, and every one of them included Patty Murray sitting down with Johnny Isaacson and working out what looked like an intractable problem, bill after bill after bill after bill. And then came John Tester from the Veterans Committee, and his tribute to Johnny Isaacson talked about not only being a good man, but achieving good things on a bipartisan basis. And then came Chris Coons from the Foreign Relations Committee with the same litany. The point I'm getting to is this. Johnny Isaacson is an extraordinarily good person, and we're going to miss him. But when he talks about his service in the Senate, he may talk about his friends, but he's also going to talk about what he did on the floor of the United States Senate. What was done in that chamber to pass legislation that made a difference in the United States and in the world. Now look at us, where we are today. A Senate is a terrible thing to waste. We are not even taking up critical legislation that we know is important that has been sitting over here for months, easily accessible by Senator McConnell. He's focused and, I guess, in a fashion, consumed by one thing: appointments to the federal bench. We see them day after day after day. The point I'm getting to, and others will as well, is it is hard to get to the Senate. It's harder to stay. And while we're here, we should do something. Lamar Alexander was right. Johnny Isakson did a lot of great things. Those of us still serving would like to have that opportunity too.
Senator Murray.
Well, thank you, and I just want to keep this short. We have heard reports that President Trump may refuse to sign any appropriations bills unless he gets his way on the unnecessary border wall. Well, we have 17 days till the deadline, just 17 days, and I really hope the President chooses to allow Congress to do its work and make sure we avoid a shutdown and can invest responsibly in critical priorities. We did just have a really nice bipartisan lunch honoring a man, Johnny Isakson, who I'm proud to call a friend, who I've worked with on so many pieces of legislation that are signed into law. And as everyone will tell you, you get it done by listening to each other, respecting each other, and making things happen by not being the person who says my way or the highway. I hope the President listens to that today, because the American people are counting on us to get these bills done, to go home for the holidays, and to make sure they're not worried and stressed about what's happening here. So I just call on the President to let Congress do its work. When you allow us to do our work, we can get this done.
Well, I want to join with my colleagues and in saluting Senator Johnny Isakson and wishing him all the best. Really an incredible friend and colleague, and he does represent the best of the Senate, the ability to work across the aisle to be able to get things done, and that's what the people of our states have sent us here to do. We've all worked very hard to get here, and we want to actually do something that's going to improve the lives of the people that we represent. And when I hear Senator McConnell talk about, the House is doing nothing but impeachment, of course that's not true. They have had over 400 different votes on legislation, while they are also focused on a constitutional issue of tremendous importance for the country. And they've sent it to us, and it's the Senate leader who's decided not to do anything with it, to create a legislative graveyard. And I want to mention just three things. One is pensions. We've got 1.5 million workers and retirees whose pensions are at serious risk of insolvency. We as Democrats believe a pension is a promise. I never thought in my life we would have to actually fight for people to get money that they put aside in a pension after working their whole lives. But that's where they are. And we're in Michigan right now looking at cuts 50%, 60%, 70% of retiree pensions. And I would just remind everybody that Congress bailed out the banks after the 2008 crisis, but what happened to protecting the retirement income of middle-class families? Keep in mind that during that financial crisis, pensions overall lost around a quarter of their value, 25% of their value, and American workers lost $2.4 trillion in IRAs and 401ks. That deserves a sense of urgency and action, and we as Democrats have that. It's been 132 days since the House passed their version of a bill, Butch-Lewis Act, which would do a long-term loan to allow these pension systems to recover. It's been 334 days since Senator Manchin introduced the American Miners Act, and these things need to get done. Secondly, Senator Schumer talked about election security. In October, the House passed the SHIELD Act, which requires campaigns and political parties to report attempts by foreign governments to influence our elections. Sound familiar? Might be a good time for us to actually act and pass that legislation. And then finally, let me just say the climate crisis is real. Around the world, people are embracing this, understanding what has happened and the results of carbon pollution, but it's been 215 days since the House sent a bill to us, and it's sitting here because of Mitch McConnell's inaction. And what does the President do? He responds to the climate challenge by spreading conspiracy theories on Twitter and withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. So we're here to say we're ready to work. We want to protect pensions, ensure fair elections, take action on the climate crisis. Mitch McConnell, stop stalling and do your job.
Questions? Yes.
Senator McConnell just said if he can't reach an agreement with you on impeachment, he'll go to his caucus to see if he can get 51 votes for a resolution just as the proposal. Have you talked to him yet? Do you think
No.
that can be avoided?
We haven't talked yet. I hope it can be avoided. The best way to do something as important and almost as hallowed a procedure as this is in a bipartisan way. So I hope that Leader McConnell will make every effort to come up with a bipartisan solution working with me. I'm certainly willing to work with him.
Have you talked to Leffler or Becker, and what do you expect her role here would be?
Have not. Today's Johnny Isaacsen's day.
You've been around the block a few times now with appropriations deals. Does this feel like the moment in which you will get to an outcome, or is that still?
I'm very hopeful. Look, I think most of the senators, Democrat and Republican, and most of the House members, Democrat and Republican, want to come to an agreement. People realize that that is the best way to go. But the unknown quantity here, or not known, is President Trump, who has repeatedly thrown wrenches into the gears with his own sort of way, and he ends up paying a price for it. The question is, will cooler heads prevail upon him so he learns the best way to deal with this is a negotiation, not saying my way or the highway, which is what the reports are he seems to be doing, and that could be a real problem for the country.
Republicans seem very divided on the question of whether you can interfere with the election. Some flatly say that they do not, others are very open to the idea. Why do you think that is?
There is no evidence that Ukraine interfered other than Putin pushing it. 17 intelligence agencies said Russia interfered with the election. Not a single intelligence agency has come to any conclusion that Ukraine did. This was a right-wing conspiracy theory, and we're in a new time here. I'm just aghast that my Republican colleagues, obeisance to Trump, who we know will say anything, whether it's true or not, just embrace it. It's appalling, and it's shameful on them.
Do you have any comment on the impeachment inquiry report that
I haven't seen it yet, so it just came out.
the evidence of the president's misconduct is overwhelming, and so
Well,
is
as I'm going to wait to read the report, but I just hope our Senate procedure will be a full procedure and an open procedure, not something that's unduly truncated.
Do you have any comment on Mike Bloomberg's presidential run? Do you think he'd be a good candidate? What do you make of him spending all this money to get in the...
Well, look, I've commented on that. As I've said before about all the candidates, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's find the best candidate. He's done a good job on things like guns and immigration.
Do you believe, as you negotiate the resolution of the impeachment trial, that there are Republicans, moderates, local elections, who you can bring to your side to support Democrats?
Well, I hope so. A lot of the Republican senators, when they go home and asked a simple question, did Trump do something wrong, are afraid to answer that. So I hope they'd have some courage of their convictions.
Chamber's voting today and tomorrow. Sarah Hitlick, nominee for a judge in Missouri. She's worked to defend abortion restrictions.
Yeah, we think
What do
she...
you all think of her nomination?
I think you couldn't... It's hard. There are many bad nominations, but it's hard to think of one that's as bad as hers.
What is the possible impact that y'all see?
Well, it's terrible. I mean, they're putting right-wing judges on the bench. These judges are far away from where the average American is, even far away from the average Republican. And the hard right has had a plan for 35 years, and that is because they can't win their way with the public, with the elected branches of government, the Article I branch or the Article II branch, that they want to try to do it on the bench. That is not the way to go. And the fact that the Federalist Society, a hard right group dedicated to overthrowing Roe v. Wade, has a veto power on all the judges, I mean, it's a very, very bad thing for the country. But I think, the only recourse, given how they changed the rules, is the ballot box. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.